Look closely at a pair of blue eyes, and you might assume you're seeing blue pigment. But here's the strange part, blue eyes don't actually contain blue pigment. In fact, the difference between blue eyes and brown eyes begins with something much less colorful. Melanin. It's the same broad family of pigment involved in the color of your skin and hair. And inside your eyes, small differences in this pigment can dramatically change what other people see. So why do some humans have dark brown eyes while others have blue, green, gray, or hazel eyes? And how did all of these colors appear in the first place? The answer begins in a thin ring of tissue surrounding your pupil. The iris. When you look into someone's eyes, much of the color you're noticing comes from this structure. And one of the most important ingredients determining its appearance is melanin. Generally, irises containing more melanin appear darker. That's why heavily pigmented irises usually look brown. Melanin absorbs a significant amount of incoming light before that light can scatter back toward an observer. With less melanin, however, something interesting begins to happen. More light can interact with the structure of the iris itself. And that's where blue eyes become surprisingly strange. There isn't a layer of blue paint hiding inside a blue iris. There isn't some special reservoir filled with blue pigment either. Instead, blue eyes contain relatively little melanin in the front layers of the iris. Light enters the tissue and interacts with microscopic structures inside it. Some wavelengths are scattered back toward your eyes more effectively than others. And the light reaching you can make the iris appear blue. In other words, part of what you're seeing is an optical effect. It's somewhat like asking why the sky looks blue. The mechanisms aren't identical, but both involve the way light interacts with matter rather than a simple layer of blue pigment. That's also why blue eyes can sometimes look different depending on the lighting around them. Under bright daylight, they may appear intensely blue. Under different lighting, the same eyes can look grayish or much darker. But humans don't come with only two settings, brown and blue. Green eyes add another layer of complexity. They generally contain more pigmentation than many blue eyes, but less than typical dark brown eyes. Combined with the way light interacts with the iris, that pigmentation can produce the appearance we call green. Hazel eyes can be even more variable. They may contain mixtures and patterns of brown, gold, green, or other tones across the iris. From one angle they may look brownish. In different light, they may seem noticeably greener. Gray eyes introduce still another variation in pigmentation and iris structure. So the colors we give eyes are really convenient labels for a much more complicated biological spectrum. But that raises an even bigger question. What tells your iris how much pigment to produce in the first place? For that, we have to look inside your DNA. Eye color is strongly influenced by genetics. But the genetics are more complicated than many of us were taught in school. You may have heard a simple rule. Brown eyes are dominant. Blue eyes are recessive. That model can be useful for introducing basic genetics, but real human eye color doesn't fit neatly into a single gene box. Multiple genetic variants contribute to the final result. Two particularly important regions involve genes known as OCA2 and HERC2. OCA2 plays an important role in pigmentation and melanin production. Nearby genetic variation involving HERC2 can influence how OCA2 is regulated. Changes in this system can therefore affect how much pigment develops in the iris. But those aren't the only genes involved. Other genetic variants can modify pigmentation and help create the wide range of eye colors seen across human populations. Think of eye color less like a single light switch and more like a control panel. Several controls can influence the final appearance. That complexity explains why predicting a child's eye color isn't always as easy as comparing the parents. Two brown-eyed parents can sometimes have a child with considerably lighter eyes. Brothers and sisters can also inherit different combinations of genetic variants. One sibling may have brown eyes while another has hazel, green, or blue eyes. They're drawing from overlapping genetic histories, but they don't receive exactly the same combination. And there's another twist. The eye color you have as an adult may not be exactly the color you appeared to have shortly after birth. Some babies are born with relatively light-looking eyes that become darker over time. As pigmentation develops, more melanin can accumulate in the iris. The visible color may gradually change during infancy and early childhood. So even after you're born, the appearance of your eyes can still be developing. But genetics only explains how eye color passes from parents to children. It doesn't explain why humans have these different genetic variants at all. To understand that, we need to move backward through human history. Far backward. For much of our species' history, our ancestors lived in regions with intense sunlight. Dark pigmentation was widespread in ancestral human populations. And brown eyes remain by far the most common eye color globally today. At some point in human history, however, genetic variations affecting iris pigmentation appeared. Some of these variations resulted in lighter eyes. Those variants were then inherited by later generations. And as populations moved, separated, expanded, and mixed, the frequencies of those variants changed. This is where evolution becomes more complicated than simply saying one eye color was better. Natural selection is only one force that can shape genetic variation. Chance matters too. Imagine a relatively small population carrying certain eye color variants. If that population grows rapidly, variants that were once uncommon can become much more frequent among its descendants. This is one way population history can leave a visible mark on people thousands of years later. Genetic drift can also change how common a variant becomes without that variant providing a major survival advantage. Migration can introduce variants into new populations. Population mixing can combine genetic histories that were previously separated. And researchers have also explored whether sexual selection may have influenced the frequency of some pigmentation traits. But we should be careful here. There isn't one simple evolutionary story explaining every eye color in every human population. Human populations have migrated, mixed, expanded, contracted, and mixed again for thousands of years. The patterns we see today are the result of that complicated history. This is why geography and ancestry can influence how common particular eye colors are. Brown eyes occur across populations around the world. Lighter eye colors are especially frequent in some European populations. But those patterns aren't biological borders. Human genetic variation doesn't stop neatly at the edge of a country or continent. People move. Populations mix. Genes travel with them. And over generations, combinations that were once geographically separated can appear together. This brings us back to something easy to overlook. Eye color looks incredibly obvious from the outside. We can identify it in less than a second. Brown. Blue. Green. Hazel. Gray. Yet underneath those simple labels is an enormous chain of events. First, you inherit a particular combination of genetic variants. Those variants influence biological processes involved in pigmentation. Those processes affect the amount and distribution of melanin in your iris. The structure and pigmentation of that iris determine how incoming light is absorbed and scattered. Light then leaves the eye and travels toward another person's retina. Their brain processes that light. And finally, they give what they see a name. Blue. Brown. Green. A color that seems simple is actually the final step in a chain connecting genetics, biology, physics, and perception. And sometimes, even that system produces unusual results. Some people have different colors in their two eyes. This is known as heterochromia. In other cases, different regions of the same iris can contain noticeably different colors. Differences in pigmentation can produce these striking patterns. Most of the time, we notice them simply because they look unusual. But biologically, they reveal something important. Eye color isn't a uniform coat of paint. It's the visible result of pigmentation developing inside living tissue. And now we can finally return to the mystery we started with. Why do humans have different eye colors? Not because nature created separate pigments for every color we see. And not because a single gene simply chooses brown, blue, or green. The real answer is far more interesting. Your genes help regulate pigmentation. Pigmentation changes how your iris interacts with light. The structure of the iris changes how that light is scattered. Your ancestry influences which genetic variants you were likely to inherit. And thousands of generations of migration, inheritance, chance, and evolution helped determine how common those variants became. What you finally see in the mirror is the result of all of those processes happening together. Which means a blue eye isn't simply blue. A brown eye isn't simply brown. And a green eye isn't simply green. Each is the visible outcome of an invisible biological history. A history written partly in pigment, partly in light, and partly in DNA. Every iris carries a slightly different version of that story. Some contain enough melanin to absorb much of the incoming light and appear deep brown. Others contain less pigment, allowing light and tissue structure to produce dramatically different appearances. But underneath the colors, the basic human machinery is remarkably similar. That's perhaps the most fascinating part. The enormous visual diversity of human eyes can emerge from relatively subtle differences in the same biological system. Differences inherited from parents who inherited them from their parents. Passed backward through families. Through populations. Through migrations. Through thousands of generations. So the next time you look into someone's eyes, pay attention to the color. But remember that you're seeing much more than color. You're seeing pigment shaped by genes. You're seeing light interacting with microscopic tissue. You're seeing fragments of population history carried into the present. And you're seeing the outcome of countless genetic combinations that had to exist before you did. All of that history is compressed into a ring only a few millimeters wide. Your eye color isn't just something you inherited. It's genetics, light, biology, and human history. All meeting in a single glance.